You know, in a thesis defense, there are certain things you just simply don't say because they come across as careless, risky, and can unnecessarily weaken your position. In this video, I will share with you 10 things that you should be really careful with in a thesis defense. We'll talk about why they're risky and what you can say instead. Let's get into it. The examiner asks something like this: why did you use this method? Or why did you choose this scale? And some students answer, because my supervisor told me to do it like this, because my supervisor asked me to use this scale. Of course, your supervisor may have advised you. That is normal. Supervisors guide students, they suggest directions, they help you avoid bad choices. But in a thesis defense, you do not want to sound like you were merely following instructions, because the thesis is supposed to be your work. You are the one defending it, you are the one who needs to show ownership of the choices that were made. So instead of saying, my supervisor told me to do it like this or that, you could say something like this: I considered and discussed several options with my supervisor, and based on that discussion, I chose this or that approach because it aligned the best with this or that. That is a much stronger answer. It still acknowledges that you had guidance and advice from your supervisor, but it does not make you sound passive. Second, the examiner asks something like this: why did you choose this topic? Which is a pretty common thesis defense question, and one answer you should probably avoid is saying something like, well, I chose this topic because it was easy, because I had heard from fellow students that this would be easy to research. Now, there may be truth in that. Maybe the topic was manageable and easy and convenient, but if you say it like that in a thesis defense, I chose it because it was easy, that makes your research sound lazy, convenience-driven, and unserious. It sounds like you simply chose the path of least resistance. A much better and still honest response would be something like this: I chose this topic because it was methodologically and operationally feasible within the scope of the thesis, and at the same time, it was also academically and practically relevant. And if you want, you could also add another sentence like this: this topic allowed me to investigate a real problem in a focused manner, staying within the time, sample, and data constraints of our graduation project. This sounds much better. It is still honest, but it does not sound lazy. Number 3, the examiner asks something like this: why did you formulate your hypothesis this way? What was the logic behind this hypothesized relationship? Here, the answer you probably should not give is, I guess I just wanted to prove my hypothesis. This may sound innocent, but it creates a serious problem. It represents a fundamental misunderstanding of research. Research is not about proving your hypothesis, it's about testing an idea, examining evidence, and being open to what the empirical data show. Do they support your hypothesis or don't they? So if I were to say that I wanted to prove my hypothesis, it makes me sound a little biased. A much better answer would be something like this: the hypothesis was based on the literature and the theoretical framework, and specifically, it was anchored on theory A and theory B, both of which indicates XYZ. The purpose of the study was, of course, not to prove it, but to test whether this expected relationship would actually be supported by the empirical data collected from organizational members in the industry. This is a much more mature research stance. Because in research, your hypothesis is not something that you protect emotionally, it is something you examine critically. In fact, this reminds me of a recent video I published, How to Defend Unsupported and Unexpected Results. Look, if the objective is to prove your hypothesis, then when your hypothesis is not supported, that means you already failed with the research. But since that is not the purpose of research, even if your findings are unsupported or unexpected, there often is still value in that research. Check out my related video on how to defend unsupported and unexpected results. I will put the link down below. Number 4, the examiner asks something like this: why did you use this sample? Or why didn't you collect more data? Here, some students would answer by saying, oh well, because I didn't have enough time. I just did what I could. Time constraints are real. We always need more time. Having more time would always be better. But saying, I did it like this simply because I didn't have enough time, that makes it sound like your time planning was poorly done and that the research was not well executed. A better response would be something like this: given the available time and access constraints, I made a focused methodological choice that was feasible and practical within the scope of the project. I recognize that my sample size was moderate, but the data collected still allowed me to properly answer my research question in a reliable and valid manner. That would be better. I'm not pretending that there were no constraints or limitations, but I'm framing them as part of a deliberate methodological choice. Number 5, the examiner asks something like this. What are the limitations of your study? One answer I think you should almost never give is, there are no limitations. I can't think of any limitations. We talked about this one also in other videos. Every study has limitations. Even studies published by famous professors in top-tier journals have limitations. So saying that your research has no limitations, that doesn't make you sound confident. It makes you sound naive. A much better response would be something like this. My sample size was relatively moderate, which limits generalizability. But given the research was qualitative exploratory, generalizability was not a major expectation. The goal of this study was to go deep, not broad, and the interview data did give me that. This answer is better because I mentioned a relevant and genuine limitation, but at the same time still highlight the value of the research. Number 6, the examiner asks you a question that feels strange, too broad, or not directly related to your thesis. So you may be tempted to say, this question is not relevant. Well, be careful there. Even if the question genuinely feels outside the scope of your study, saying that this is not relevant can sound dismissive or disrespectful. It could really backfire. A better response would be something like this. Well, I think the question is slightly outside the main scope of my research. Let me connect it to my study this way. This sounds more professional. I'm still pointing out the scope and boundary issue, which you are perfectly allowed to do, but I do it in a professional and neutral manner. Number 7, the examiner asks, in chapter 3, you mentioned this or that. Can you explain it further? Here, one thing you really do not want to say is, I don't remember what I wrote in that chapter. This is risky because it suggests that you don't even know your own thesis. At a time when universities are all very concerned about did this student write the thesis or did an AI tool do it, to say something like this is unnecessarily risky. Now, to be fair, a thesis can be quite long. You may not remember every page, every sentence, and every little detail. That is normal. Here, a better response would be something like this. Of course, I'm happy to elaborate on that point further. Could you please tell me which page you are referring to, so that I could check the exact wording and address this point accurately? Then, take a moment to refer to your own thesis and share your explanations. This would be much better. You're honest, you're calm, you're careful. You refer first to the written work before responding in full. That is what a mature researcher would do. Number 8, the examiner may ask, don't you think your sample size was too small? Given your small sample size, are your findings really generalizable? A very self-destructive answer here would be, my sample size is small, so the results are probably not useful. Do not destroy your own study more than necessary. Yes, a small sample size can be a limitation, but that does not automatically mean that the study is useless. As we have talked about in my other videos, as a researcher, I would never say that my sample size is small. I would only say that my sample size was moderate. If the examiner asks you or challenges you on your sample size, a strong response will be something like this. Yes, my sample size was moderate, and that might limit the generalizability of the findings somewhat. I fully acknowledge that as a potential limitation. However, this study was descriptive and it was focused on this particular organization, the company where I did my internship. That's why I would argue that the key findings and conclusions from my study are highly relevant and meaningful for this company and similar organizational contexts. The goal was not broad generalizability, to be frank. That is the balance you want. You acknowledge the limitation without discounting the entire value of your research. Number 9, the examiner asks, why did you use this statistical test? Why did you interpret the output this way? A poor answer that I have heard from students often is something like, I'm really not good with statistics. I'm not a numbers person. This is dangerous because it undermines confidence in your data analysis. Look, the honest truth is this. You don't need to be an expert genius statistician. You don't need to be good at all statistics. But for the statistical test that you did run for your data analysis, you need to know the basics. What test did I do? Why did I do it? And what the results meant. So a better answer could be something like this. Because I was interested in examining the relationship between variable A and variable B, I performed a bivariate correlation test. This was proper because both variables were measured at a scale level and my research question focused on whether there was a statistical association between them. To interpret the output, I followed our statistical course materials and the textbook by field. I looked at the Pearson correlation coefficient to assess the direction and strength of the relationship and the p-value to assess whether the relationship was significant. So in this case, I would describe the relationship as this or that. An answer like this would be perfectly fine. You don't need to be a statistical expert. You just need to show that you understand the basic logic of the statistical test which you did for your thesis. Number 10, the examiner asks something like, how did you develop this section? How did you come up with this model or framework? Did you use AI for it? One answer that can create unnecessary trouble is, oh well, yes, I used ChatGPT for that. I did some in-depth research for this on ChatGPT. Now, of course, this depends a lot on your university's rules and regulations, and it also depends on how you use ChatGPT or other AI tools, but this could be very tricky these days. Rules and regulations around AI use differ a lot across universities and programs. Some universities allow AI tools quite openly, some strongly restrict them, and many are somewhere in the middle. They allow certain forms of AI use by students, but only under very specific conditions, thereby sometimes creating complications and even potential confusions. That's why a casual answer like, I used ChatGPT for that, can be very risky. It may sound as if the AI tool generated the academic reasoning, the model, the analysis, or the interpretation for you. And if the examiner starts thinking that, the conversation can very quickly shift from a normal thesis defense to some kind of academic misconduct concern. So my suggestion here for this point is not to memorize one perfect sentence. My advice is this: you need to know your university's AI rules very clearly. Know what is allowed and what isn't. Be prepared to explain the boundary accurately and show that you did not use AI for anything that is not allowed. Be cautious about AI use. This is something that needs to be handled with precision and institutional awareness these days. So, to sum up, these are the 10 things you would want to be very careful with these days during your thesis defense. Agree or disagree? One thing I would still want to add is this. Of course, the title of this video is Never Say These 10 Things, but I don't mean that language works in a completely absolutist way. Context matters, tone of voice matters, and sometimes, in the right situation, saying something completely unexpected can actually work very well. It could show creativity and contrarian thinking, which may be highly appreciated. So don't treat this video as a list of forbidden words. Treat it as a list of risky response patterns. The real point is to be aware of how your answers may come across to the examiners when you are under pressure. As always, I invite you to leave your thoughts and comments down below. Please also check out my other videos on thesis defense and academic evaluation. I am sure you will find them interesting and useful. Thanks for watching this Ranywayz random video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.